Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So we continue with our sessions on Muslim, non-Muslim relations. We wanted to talk about the issue of faith, compassion, and human dignity. And we wanted to emphasize, firstly, that the Quran itself talks about the human condition and what it is that we find ourselves in. In the verse, indeed, we have made that which is on the earth an adornment for it, that we may test them. Human beings, which of them is the most beautiful and virtuous in actions? That's the human condition. That we go through struggles, that we encounter ourselves in hardship and ease. Just today, while I was on lunch break, a woman and her child, a woman that was handicapped, she saw me eating and she asked me to share some money with her. And the reality is that I didn't have any money on me in this digital age. And then she asked me, she said, well, can you purchase some food for us? So in that situation, the expression of her need became a question to me. Am I going to help this woman after I denied her when she asked for monetary support? In this situation, am I going to help her? So she was in a situation of hardship, and I was in a situation of ease, when it was not something difficult for me in that moment to purchase her some food. As a matter of fact, it was nothing but a return of blessings. And we find ourselves in many situations like that in life, with our family members, with our neighbors. We find ourselves in situations like that with our coworkers. Sometimes we're in a position of hardship, and sometimes we're in a position of ease. We may test them, human beings, which of them is the most beautiful and virtuous in actions. That's how we look at life. That these situations are situations which test us. What people bring to us, they test us to see what kind of human being we're going to be. The Quran also says, do you not see that Allah sends down rain from the sky and we produce thereby fruits of varying colors? Firstly, the idea of rain is what we call provision. And sometimes even in some of the Muslim cultures, like in Turkey, they call rain rahmah. We also call it rizq. And here the Quran is telling us to reflect and pointing to us that God sends down rain from the sky on all of humanity. On all of humanity. And from that reality is produced fruits of varying color. From that rain. Of course, there's other processes and so on and so forth that have to do with the fact that we believe, as people of belief, that God created this system. And in this system is an environment which the human being is provided for. The human being is provided for. And in the mountains are tracks white and red of varying shades and some extremely black. Now, between the idea of fruits of varying colors and the colors in the mountains, the idea of diversity is there. And in this context, Allah mentions humanity. And among people and moving creatures and grazing livestock are various colors similarly. So here, the issue has to do with our diversity. Our diversity. That yes, we have differences, but at the end of the day, built into life is this ultimate point of character. And this is something that religions, they have to find the common ground on. The issue of ethics or the issue of good character. How is it that we're going to deal with each other? It is a fact that there's clear differences between religions on the earth on some points where there's no compromise. For us as Muslims, we believe that God is one. And we have a clear understanding of what that means. But that does not mean that those who say that they believe in God and they say that God is one, and it's not the same definition to God that we have. That doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge at least that they do believe in some creator beyond the human being. But more than that, when we find other communities and they say that they believe in loving your brother like loving yourself, or loving your sister like loving yourself, we agree with that. That's a shared value. So we have to, in diversity, be able to see where the common ground is, and at the same time hold on to what it is that we believe. But we can't get to that point of that common ground if it is that we don't acknowledge that there's diversity on the earth. Some of it is beautiful, is acceptable, is to be celebrated. And then there's that which we may differ over how it plays itself out. Differences in decision making, differences in attitude, differences in beliefs. But somewhere along the way, we have to be able to find where it is that we can meet in doing good in the world. We have to at least be able to meet at that point. Some of the scholars, they say one of the challenges that we have is a challenge of perception, where we see ourselves as different. That's the point of mentioning the verse of the Quran in which the Quran is telling us, and among people and moving creatures and grazing livestock are various colors similarly. In other words, there's diversity. There's some differences that are there, but where there's common ground is that we're human beings. But this idea of other, al-akhir, as we say in Arabic, the challenge of our perception of a separate, different other, and the seemingly multiplicity of separate and perhaps opposite identities is the most critical challenge of our time. That's true. We find it amongst people of the same religion, where they may differ with one another and it may even rise to the point of violence. We find that within marital couples in which they're supposed to complement each other and they're supposed to have a sense of harmony. We find that within families. We find that in neighborhoods. We find that within political parties. We're in a time period where differences of opinion are leading to breakdown in relationships at multiple levels. It could go all the way to the level of war, or it could go all the way to the level of lawsuits and conflict. Conflict has become more the norm than stability and cooperation and goodness, unfortunately. And so people find it in the workplace. They find it difficult. Can't tell you how many people talk about the challenges that they find in the workplace. You find many people have abandoned organized religion because they feel as though that they don't have any place, right? So this idea of shared humanity is extremely important. This idea where we're able to see ourselves and other people is extremely important. Before we begin to see the differences that we have with them, to see the common ground that we have with them, right? And in a time period where there's physical distance, and that physical distance at one time meant that people would live in another part of the world and they would have another culture and it would be completely different than another culture. We live in a time period where those physical boundaries have been almost obliterated, almost eliminated, almost done away with the fact of technology. If I wanted to reach out to someone in China, I can reach out to someone in China by way of technology. And by way of technology, I can use Google Translate. I can somewhat communicate with that person, whereas 20 years ago, that would nearly be impossible for me to be able to do. I could be in one part of the world and I can have friends and relatives in another part of the world that I may have a relationship with them for 5 years continuously without seeing them, but I know what they're doing every other day to some extent. And so technology has allowed us to cross over certain barriers that were real barriers into us coming to know one another. But at the same time, we've come to a point where the barriers of actually understanding each other are higher than the barriers of physical differences or the barriers of language. The barrier of actually wanting to see how it is that we share in the same humanity. And the Quran is telling us, as a matter of principle, the Muslim belief that humanity has a common origin and a common ground, and that diversity in the human community is something which is natural. Now, that's diversity at the physical level, and the issue of color, and the issue of man, woman, and the diversity at the physical level. Even at the cultural level, some of that is going to be there. But what's not allowed is diversity that violates the dignity of the human being, where it is that we have beliefs and practices which destroy our recognition, our acceptance that human beings have dignity, right? That's important. So there's a critical need to restore and to return to our shared humanity in all religions, in all orientations and philosophies, regardless of what their belief is, have to come back to this common ground. They may not believe in God, and we're going to have to coexist on the earth. But one of the things is that when they begin to violate this issue of not recognizing human dignity, then it becomes almost impossible, if not impossible, to function and cooperate. Because then now you're running into a situation of oppression. You're running into a situation of social injustice. You're running into a situation in which human beings no longer have a sense of right, no longer have protections, right? So at the forefront, religious orientations have to bring us to that point. Religions are the ones that teach that loving others is a responsibility and an obligation. So religions have to teach that as a basis and how it is that they're going to interact with one another. And if religions which are claiming to be the ones that have some grasp of the truth of life and how to live life can't uphold that reality, then how is it that we can expect the rest of society, which is not claiming that, to uphold the idea of human dignity? And which, unfortunately, in many cases, this is a conclusion which many have reached. You find many times those who don't believe in God, they're the ones that are championing human rights. They're the ones that are championing social justice. And then you find in religious communities at times, they pull back and they begin to be the ones that are the causes of problems. And what happens is this leads to the whole discussion of religion is the cause of division on the face of the earth, which is not true. It's a lack of truly understanding the core of religion, that religion upholds the human being, that religion is calling for respect of human dignity, is a violation of those religious principles, those truths, which causes a lot of the conflict on earth. And sometimes people utilize religion and they use it to violate the rights of others, to steal their wealth, to steal their land, to belittle other human beings. But loving the other is our conscious responsibility, right? As faith leaders, we have to recognize that it's very dangerous when we exclude people. When we talk about society, we have to talk about a society that is including everyone, even if we disagree with them. Religion shouldn't be used as a target to destroy other people. Religion should be used as a means by which we identify that behavior which is destructive to the group, to the overall common good of society. And furthermore, religion adds that dimension of saying, well, there's certain actions which are not only harmful in this world, but they're harmful in the next world. It was the Catholic priest Hans Kung who said that there can be no peace in the world if we don't have peace amongst religions. And that doesn't mean that we're going to agree on everything, but it means that we're civil enough to have an understanding that when we begin to demonize one another, then we are giving the message that it's okay in the name of God to demonize other human beings. And once we take that route, we create an environment where we allow for violence to take place against humanity, right? And that becomes the failure of the religious communities. So we have to have this idea that when we deal with other people that differ from us, as Muslims. The Quran calls us to have an understanding that we have a shared humanity. It's not that they're a different type of human being and we're another type of human being. It's not that they have more or less value, or we have more or less value. So that the Quran teaches us, and we mentioned this before on different occasions in different situations, لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that we have honored the children of Adam. And from there, the issue of karama comes the issue of dignity of the human being. And that's something that is inherent. It's something that is built into the creation of God. The human being has dignity because the human being is the creation of God. And the human being has certain qualities and features which are distinct. And the human being, actually, if you look at the reality compared to other life forms, the human being is very fragile, very fragile. But when that human being gets out of control, can be extremely destructive. And the angels in the Quran had testified to that in Surah Al-Baqarah, or the chapter of Al-Baqarah, when they pointed out to God that this being and be the being which will create corruption and shed blood on the earth. But God gave this understanding that the human being, when the human being incorporates the values and the truths of revelation, the human being will be the most honored on the earth. Because after all, even though there's a basic dignity that everyone has that has to be respected, there's inequality where there's inequality in that all of us are not at the same level of doing good. So those that do good are not equal to those that do bad, or those that are corrupt on the earth, regardless of whether they're religious or not religious. At the core, they have human dignity. But when we talk about character, there's a difference in people's character. The person that's a killer is not equivalent to the person that saves life. The person that robs and steals and cheats and has an impact on hundreds of people is not the same as the one that upholds life. We have a prophetic tradition. And in this prophetic tradition, which is attributed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that Allah addresses his creation and says, "Oh, my servants, I have made oppression unlawful upon myself and unlawful for you. Do not oppress one another." And so here we find that the directive, that the command, that the guidance is for us in how we deal with all of humanity. "Oh, my servants, I have made oppression unlawful upon myself and unlawful for you. Do not oppress one another." Right? And so that's something that is extremely important to understand. And so ultimately, the only way that we're going to come to a point where we can have some civil understanding of each other, some sort of equitable, just relationship, is if we come to know one another. The Quran says, "Oh mankind, indeed we have created for you, we have created you from male and female. Oh mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you into nations and tribes so that you may come to know one another." Ta'aruf. Knowing one another is the first step, but the ultimate goal is the ability to see humanity in others. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he looked at people, he looked at their humanity, right? And so there is a loving of humanity. It doesn't mean that we love what they do that is wrong. It doesn't mean that we love points of belief that go against truth, but because they're the creation of Allah, we love them. We deal with one another justly, whether Muslim or not Muslim. And at the end of the day, when we can see that humanity in others and when we can understand others, then we're able to cooperate in goodness. تعاونوا على البر والتقوى ولا تعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان. You know, cooperate in goodness, all kinds of goodness. Cooperate with establishing the values of revelation, right? And don't cooperate in sin, don't cooperate in going against the truths that that God gives to you, right? And don't cooperate in being enemies to one another and opposing one another in violence and everything that goes along with that. When we have that understanding, we're able to engage in social projects that demonstrate compassion and empathy for others. And that's supposed to be the role of religion, right? We're able to find out the direct needs that are in our society, like caring for the elderly, like cleaning the environment, alleviating the suffering of others, engaging in addressing humanity's needs, right? Looking after the youth, creating an environment in which our youth can thrive and function. In other words, participating with each other in creating a common good. In whatever levels we find them, we find it in, whether it's economics or politics, or whether it is the type of culture that is being produced, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, the task of religion is to encourage the best in human beings. And so when we deal with other religions, or Muslims in specific, just because we're dealing with other religions doesn't mean we're compromising in what it is that we believe in terms of who Allah is. We always hold true to that. But we have to realize that we can't force others to believe as we believe, but we may find, when we're patient with others, that they share certain things that we believe in. And on that, we're able to build. And because we're in a time period where we have to coexist with others, we have to build on that which is the common ground with others. For our benefit and for their benefit is only intelligent in that regard, especially if we're looking after our own benefit, to learn how to cooperate with each other on those things which are going to promote the good in our society, in our workplace, in the future of our youth. But when we allow an environment to be created where it's dehumanizing, that's going to come back to us as well, because it's going to be an environment which allows for the dehumanization of people, and we won't be exempted from that. We won't be protected from that dehumanization that takes place. And so in our dealing with other people is on this basis that there's a shared humanity, that we're called to be just, that we have an understanding that people have rights over us, and we have rights in this society as well, and that there's good that we should be promoting. And we have to exemplify those values that we say that we believe in. And we need to go into discussions about how it is that we're going to work this type of thing out, of course. But once again, we don't go in thinking that everybody has the same belief when it comes to who Allah is. But what we do in this time where we find ourselves in a conflict with what it is that other people believe regarding who Allah is we look to see what other values do they have that we can work with them on. That's extremely important, right? If they talk about being charitable to the poor, if they talk about, the necessity of caring for the elderly, or the necessity of having safe environments, all of that is good. If they talk about their belief in the prophets, okay, they believe in the prophets. They may have some beliefs that go against what we believe in, but in the belief, the idea that they believe in prophets, we believe in prophets. That's a common ground. Where we differ with them, and we differ with them. There's no issue. See what I'm saying? And so at the end of the day, it takes more effort to work these things out. But where it is that we can't allow other people to compromise on, whatever background they come from or ourselves, is this issue of regard for human dignity. That is where we protect our interests and the social interests. And as long as people are operating from that ground, that humans have dignity and they have to be respected, that we're able to work, even if we differ on other levels. And it's through our interactions with one another that we're able to show what our character is. Then people will get a true understanding of what deen is, because they see how we operate. And we have to realize, people, that we la ikraha fi deen. we can't impose our beliefs upon others. Islam allows people to have freedom of belief. But if you look at the way that the Prophet ﷺ dealt with those that did not believe, that opposed him even, you'll see a high level of character, something that is unmatched in today's time. And so our Prophet gave us that example of understanding that others may not believe as we believe, but then the question is, how are we going to cooperate? And we had mentioned this before in other situations, that even when the Muslims went into Medina, in the constitution of Medina, initially it was an agreement between people of different faith backgrounds to cooperate with each other in maintaining the well-being of society. They differed on points of belief, but in this, they agreed that they will come together to make sure that society was protected, to make sure that the well-being of society was something that everybody was working towards. And so we as Muslims, that's how we approach the situation. And we as Muslims have to ensure that others approach the situation likewise for our own benefit as well. We want the well-benefit or the well-being of society, but we also want to ensure that our benefit is there and is recognized, that our dignity as human beings is recognized. And therefore, we can't engage in those practices and in those understandings which will undermine recognizing the dignity of others. Even if we differ with them in their belief and we differ with them in some of their behavior, we still have to acknowledge their dignity as human beings. And that's only reasonable if we want to have some sort of society that's stable. And so with that, there's always that negotiation process which takes place. How are we going to work that out, right? And that's where, we have to be involved. That's where we have to be involved. And that is where, we have to learn how to deal with the realities that are on the ground. It's not an easy task by any means, but it's something that's necessary because it is the most logical, most reasonable, and it is the most non-violent way to negotiate conflict. Other than that, what begins to happen is that we open up the door for demonizing people. And once we open up the door for demonizing people, don't think that we ourselves cannot be demonized. We can be demonized. And so we don't want to open up the door to demonizing or dehumanizing other human beings. So in our dealing with religion that differs with us, we have to ensure that we understand that we're dealing with human beings in which we have a common ground of being human beings. And we have to also recognize that not everything that is believed is going to go against what we believe. And so we have to be clear on what it is that is the common ground between us and others, and how it is that we're going to deal with those points of conflict that we have between us and other religions. But the red line across the board that we can't allow ourselves or anyone to transgress is in regarding the dignity of the human being. And that's how we deal with our in the capacity as Muslims with non-Muslims, is that the common ground, wherever it may be, in the workplace, in the educational facility, in institutions, in the general society, is that we respect the humanity of others and the dignity of others. And that for us is an act of worship and is an act of recognizing that the Creator created human beings. And where it is that there's good, we support it. And where it is that there's problems, we work through it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.